Troop 13 Boy Scouts and Little Roddy Learns to Swim, Episode 175. I am Rod Murphy, and this is Growing Up Poor in Irish Boston, a series of my 1950s era Irish and Boston songs, history, jokes, and stories. And never let the truth interfere with a good story. Excuse me. This real-life story is a combination of two of my early podcast episodes. After listening to them again recently, I realized they needed more context. So here is one episode combining two stories, again, and better, I hope. In 1950, when I turned 11, I became a Boy Scout, just as my brother Gary did at that age. Troop 13 met weekly in a windowless basement room at Cambridge's Blessed Sacrament Grammar School. We learned woodscraft, knot tying, hiking, camping out, trailblazing, and helping old ladies across the street, although we did not do much of that one. We also wore Boy Scout uniforms, red neckerchiefs, and were organized into smaller units called patrols. On meeting nights after classes, we would play capture the flag. Knocking heads and general roughhousing was customary. I liked it all. John McCarthy and Joe McCarthy, friends of my brother Gary and brothers from nearby Prince Street, were the Scoutmasters. The Scoutmaster Emeritus, Geezer George McCurdy, was also around a lot. The best thing about being a Troop 13 Boy Scout was the rustic log cabin owned by the church in what was then the Boondocks in Bedford, Mass., long before Route 128 in suburbia arrived. McCurdy donated the land and built the cabin. The first time I went there, I was about 8 years old. I was not old enough to be a scout, but Gary took me on an overnight with a bunch of his scout pals. It was great. We hiked around identifying various types of trees and other flora, and also checking out birds, fish, and snakes. Then, after dark, with just a kerosene lantern, and in the bunk beds and sleeping bags, the older boys told ghost stories and talked dirty. I remember being shocked that my brother was using four-letter words, and I worried that he and the others might go to hell. One of those friends named Guilfoyle later died very young in an accident that I heard of. That further caused me anxiety because I considered that perhaps Guilfoyle had not confessed his sins to a priest and that he might have died in mortal sin. The nuns did a good job on me. I am a believer still. When I was old enough and a member of the troop so I could go on my own, I rode my bike to the cabin to camp and fish with Justin Rourke, my constant fishing pal. We would stay for days at the cabin with a couple of cans of beans, a box of pancake mix, 3 cans of Kipper snacks, a box of Cheerios, and a real glass bottle of raw milk bought at Dunham's Farm in Pinehurst on the way into the camp. We would fish the Shawsheen River and eat the trout, pickerel, perch, pout, eel, and bass that we caught. We fantasized that we were famous explorers or adventurers in the Amazon or some such place. We would hike up the slight elevation we called a hill and think about mountain climbing in the Rockies. We put together logs and scrap wood to make a raft that we rode down the river and played Tom Sawyer. It was the best fun a kid ever had. If scouts were taking public transportation, the trip to the cabin in Bedford was onerous. We needed to take the bus to Central Square, then the subway to Harvard Square. We would then take a long trolley ride out to Arlington Heights and connect to a non-MBTA bus line that would finally take us to Bedford Center. There were no highways like Route 128 then. Bedford was boondocks and farms. When we got off the bus, we still had 3 miles more to hike into the cabin. As we got close to the backwoods road into the cabin, there was a black farmer who raised pigs. He had 3 Doberman pinchers. They ran free, and when they saw us or any strangers walking or biking on the dirt road next to the farm, they would dash out snarling and threatening. They had been known to bite scouts, so we all always carried hefty sticks. As we approached the pig farm, I always tensed up, and that old fear brings to mind Cerberus, the three-headed dog of Greek mythology that guarded the gates to the underworld. Instead, we had to get past those nasty dogs guarding what we thought was heaven. Once we got past that miserable farm, it was into the deep woods and away from civilization. There was no requirement for adult supervision at this cabin. One got the key from the pastor if he was a Troop 13 first-class scout or better. I was a first-class scout, as were others. When I think back, it was amazing that we were allowed by our parents and the troop to stay overnight, cook our own food, swim, fish, hike, and raise hell, and all without a nanny. Today's youngsters are not allowed to do anything without adult supervision. We played sports to high school level without adult organization. Pickup teams voluntarily played in the street and in vacant lots. There was no Little League, Pop Warner, or the like. Today, Oprah would probably do 3 TV shows on the danger of kids going camping on their own. Dr. Phil would do a show on the possible damage to a camping kid's psyche because of the potential Lord of the Files syndrome. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi might introduce legislation that groups of kids going camping overnight must be comprised of 20% black kids, 10% Hispanic kids, 2 lesbians, 1 illegal immigrant, a cross-dresser, and 3 retards. We already had more than our quotient of retards, including me. The Pelosi legislation would also require the accompaniment of 2 scoutmasters, one who must be a flaming homosexual, at least 3 approved mothers, registered Democrats only, and a government official to report to some new acronym federal agency about that unfortunate camping group. I was lucky to grow up during saner times. We learned by doing real and big things on our own. On one of my big brother Gary's Boy Scout camping trips to the Blessed Sacrament Boy Scout camp in Bedford, I tagged along. I was 7 years younger, but was invited anyway on that trip. Gary decided that I needed to learn how to swim. I was 7 and still unable to swim. The Murphys are swimmers. In our family, if you were not a strong swimmer, you were considered strange. There was a small bridge over the Shawshene River near Pinehurst. That was the favorite swimming hole for the Cambridge Scouts. There was a deep hole in the river on the east side of the bridge which provided safe diving. The boys, all much older than I, would dive off the bridge, swim around, dunk each other, generally hoss around, and then come out, climb up onto the bridge, and dive in again. I had no idea of my coming education. After World War II, there was much Army surplus gear available cheap. The Scouts had at least 2 yellow inflatable Army surplus rubber boats or rafts. The boats were thrown in the river and used for advanced horseplay. Gary said to me without warning, "It's time you learned how to swim." Then he promptly picked me up and threw me off the bridge into the river. He threw one of those rubber rafts into the river near the shore furthest away from me. He then loudly warned me to swim or drown. I was going under and coming back up. I was kicking and splashing and thoroughly panicked. The water was cold, deep, and black. I looked to the rubber raft, then I looked to the shore and continued sinking, splashing, and spitting. Yet my splashing was somehow moving me closer to the shore. Today I realized that the distance was not far, and Gary was ready to dive in and pull me out, if I went under for too long. At that time I thought I was going to drown. I made it to shore, and all the scouts applauded me. That dramatic experience caused me to lose my fear of jumping in over my head water, and I actually did learn to swim that way. Perhaps that jumping in over my head water also applied to me taking other kinds of risks also. But I do not recommend Gary's radical pedagogical method for learning to swim. In another swimming type recollection, Tom Murphy, my sainted father, often told a story about the annual swimming relay race down the Charles River in the early 20th century. The Murphy boys were all good swimmers and often entered that race. My uncles Mike, Neil, Tim, and my father would each swim a certain leg of the race. I think the race began at the Elliott Bridge, and the relay racers swam under the Lars Anderson, the Weeks, the Western Ave, and the River Street bridges, before ending at the Cottage Farm Bridge, now called the BU Bridge, near Magazine Beach. Dad said the crowds along the river were huge and boisterous. The Murphys won this race at least once, according to Dad. The Charles later became very polluted, and such swimming races were ended. Although in my youth, I swam in the river. It's a wonder I did not catch the creeping crud. Today, the river is cleaned up. This is Rod Murphy. Thank you for viewing or listening to my YouTube and podcast episodes. I really appreciate it. If you enjoy them, please hit the subscribe button. Does not cost you anything, and it helps me to grow my audience. Again, my thanks. Note, some of my viewers and listeners have asked how they could comment on my episodes. There is a note at the top of each episode. It's called Send Us a Text. Click that, and you would be able to comment. Also, former redhead at protonmail.com is my podcast email if you would like to contact me. So it's former redhead, I used to have red hair, former redhead at proton, P-R-O-T-O-N, mail.com is my podcast email. Thank you.